Sunday mornings had always meant something sacred to me. Not in the church-going sense, but in the calm, slow unfolding of a day that didn't demand anything. My kids, Lily and Marcus, were tossing a frisbee on the front lawn while I was trimming back the hedges. My wife, Danielle, had just brought out lemonade, the kind she knew I liked, tart, not sweet. The air was warm, but not oppressive, and the Meadow Hills neighborhood had finally fallen into a rare silence. No lawnmowers, no barking dogs, just the occasional giggle from my kids and the rhythmic click of my clippers. That peace didn't last long. At first, I thought the man approaching us was a lost delivery guy, khaki uniform, sunglasses, and a clipboard. But then I saw the patch on his sleeve. Meadow Hills HOA Security Enforcement Unit. A badge-shaped logo way too official for someone hired to drive a golf cart and take notes on trash cans. He didn't say hello, didn't even look at the kids. He walked straight toward me, with a posture like he was about to make an arrest. "You're violating Community Code 7.12, he barked. I lowered my clippers. "Excuse me, no modifications to front landscaping may be made without prior written approval from the Meadow Hills HOA Architectural Committee." I blinked at him. "I'm not modifying anything. I'm trimming back overgrowth from my own hedges." He stepped forward too close now. "You've been warned before. This is strike 3. I looked back at Danielle, who stood frozen on the porch, then at my kids. Marcus had stopped mid-throw, the frisbee dangling in his hand. "I haven't received any notices," I said calmly. "And even if I did, this is routine maintenance." He pulled out a phone. "I'm documenting this. You're going to receive a formal citation, possibly a fine." I let out a slow breath. "Look, sir, you're making a scene. You're scaring my family." He smirked as if that pleased him. "I'm within my rights," I added. "And if you'd like to discuss landscaping violations, you're welcome to send a written notice, like any reasonable association." That's when it happened. Fast, brutal, unbelievable. His hand went to his belt, and in a single fluid motion, he pulled a black taser and shouted, "Stop resisting." I hadn't moved an inch. The shock tore through my body before I could speak. A bolt of lightning straight through my spine. My knees buckled and I collapsed onto the grass. Danielle screamed, no shrieked, and Marcus dropped to the ground next to me, crying out, "Dad!" I couldn't breathe. My muscles clenched uncontrollably as electricity danced under my skin. My vision tunneled. I could barely make out Lily's terrified face behind her thick curls standing frozen near the flower bed. "Get back," the officer yelled, waving the taser at my son. "Are you insane?" Danielle shouted. "He didn't do anything." Neighbors began to gather, cell phones held high. The HOA cop stood over me, chest puffed, like he'd just taken down a fugitive. "This is official Meadow Hills HOA business," he growled. "You've violated community security protocols." I struggled to speak, but only managed a grunt. Danielle knelt beside me, shielding my body with hers. "I'm calling the police," she snapped. "The real ones." He didn't even flinch. "They'll back me up. This is private property and I have jurisdiction here." He said jurisdiction like he was judge and jury. Minutes crawled. Sirens wailed in the distance. The kids were sobbing now, Marcus clutching my arm, Lily crying into her mother's shoulder. I'd never felt so helpless, so naked. My years in the military, all the deployments, the command, the discipline, it had never come to this, being tased on my front lawn in front of my family by a man with a clipboard and a taser he clearly didn't understand the weight of. When the real police arrived, the HOA cop tried to frame it as a non-compliant homeowner disturbance. I was barely sitting upright by then, my shirt soaked in sweat, my muscles trembling from the aftershock. The officer this time, a real one with a city badge, looked down at me and said, "Sir, do you need medical assistance?" Danielle was the one who answered, "Yes." "And he's pressing charges." The HOA cop's posture changed ever so slightly. "I have it all on video. A neighbor called from across the street. He didn't do a damn thing." That seemed to make the HOA cop sweat. The real officer separated us, took statements, asked questions. I was taken in an ambulance for evaluation. My blood pressure was through the roof, my chest aching from the jolt. I kept thinking about Marcus's face, the fear in it, the disbelief. Danielle came with me to the ER. The kids stayed with our neighbors. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, Avao in my arm, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You were just trimming the hedges," she whispered, still shaking. That man had no right, and she was right. He didn't. But that was the moment it all changed for me. The Meadow Hills HOA had been petty before fines for fence height notices about mailbox colors, letters about grass length, but this was violence. This was personal. I wasn't just going to recover, I was going to respond. They thought I was just another homeowner. They were wrong. I didn't sleep that night. The hospital discharged me with muscle relaxers, a pamphlet about post-electrocution symptoms, and an apology from a nurse who had seen too many ridiculous things lately. But nothing she'd seen compared to the humiliation I felt when I stepped out of that ambulance, still trembling, and looked at my 10-year-old daughter's tear-streaked face. I didn't cry then. Not in front of her, but my chest cracked with something deeper than pain. It was shame. Danielle helped me into bed once we got home. Her movements, efficient, calm. But I knew her well enough to see the storm brewing behind her silence. She checked my pulse every hour like clockwork, but refused to look me in the eye. I didn't blame her. What do you do when the man you trust to protect your family is the one dragged away on a stretcher while your kids sob in the yard? I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment I hit the ground. The searing white pain, the way Marcus screamed my name, the absolute disbelief in Lily's eyes. No father should ever have to see that look on his child's face. I didn't sleep, but I planned. Every breath I took was a ledger, every minute. I stared into the dark was a brick in the foundation of what I would build accountability. The next morning, the doorbell rang at exactly 8:03 a.m. Danielle answered. It was the Meadow Hills HOA president, Karen Holt, flanked by another board member I didn't recognize, both dressed like they were headed to a golf fundraiser, not a war zone. Karen carried a file folder and wore a thin-lipped smile that didn't touch her eyes. I just came by to make sure everything is okay, she said in that faux concerned tone that HOA tyrants seem to practice in the mirror. Danielle stepped aside just enough for me to see Karen's face from where I was sitting on the living room couch. I had an ice pack pressed to the side of my neck, and the taser prongs now removed left behind a pair of angry red welts. I'm fine, I said coolly, not moving. Oh, good, Karen chirped. Because I'd hate for a misunderstanding to create animosity between neighbors. I stood slowly. My legs still trembled from the shock and the rage, but I needed her to see I wasn't broken. A misunderstanding, I asked. Her smile faltered. Of course. Meadow Hills HOA Officer Lewis was responding to a code violation. I took a step forward. You mean trimming my own hedge? Well, she began pulling out the file folder according to the compliance report. I have the compliance report, I snapped. The only citation I received this year was for leaving my trash bins out 1 hour past the time limit. I paid the fine. No prior warnings, no landscaping violations. So what exactly was he responding to? Karen's eyes flicked to the other board member who suddenly found the texture of our doormat fascinating. Danielle crossed her arms. We have everything on video, so do our neighbors. Would you like to see the moment he tased my husband while our kids were standing 3 feet away? Karen's lips pressed together, thin and pale. Well, I just came to offer a formal apology on behalf of the board. We'd like to request that you not escalate this situation to legal authorities. There's no need for... That did it. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Karen, he assaulted me on my lawn, in front of children. I don't need your apology, I need accountability. Her voice dropped a register. James, with all due respect, suing the Meadow Hills HOA would only make things harder for everyone. We're a community. Let's not create division. Oh, the division already happened, I said. The moment your security officer decided he had the authority to act like a law enforcement agent. You empowered him. You signed off on his training. And now I'm going to hold every single person responsible. Her eyes narrowed. You won't win. Danielle stepped forward, her voice ice cold. Watch him. Karen left, after that muttering something about speaking to her lawyer. We closed the door and I sat back down, exhausted but burning. Do you really think we can do something? Danielle asked. Not out of doubt, but hope. I nodded. Yes, and I've already started. She looked at me. I reached under the coffee table and pulled out a locked folder, the kind I kept for emergencies. Inside were papers that had never mattered until now. See, this wasn't my first time dealing with power-drunk authority. Years ago, during my final deployment, I had a commanding officer who falsified orders and covered up injuries on base. I filed whistleblower paperwork, followed the chain of command, gathered evidence. It took months, but justice came, just not fast. And now I was seeing it again, abuse of power cloaked in policy. I had already started organizing every Meadow Hills HOA letter. photographing every notice, timestamping every petty threat. I had a timeline. I had video. I had witnesses. But most importantly, I had something they didn't know I had. A court order. Months ago, when the Meadow Hills HOA first tried to fine me for repainting my garage door, despite their approval on file, I had filed for arbitration. When they refused to comply, I escalated it. A judge reviewed the paperwork and issued a restraining injunction, barring the Meadow Hills HOA from taking any punitive or enforcement actions against me or my property without direct court oversight. It was rare, but I'd filed it perfectly, and they'd signed off on it. They never read it. They never respected it. And now they had violated a court order, on camera, with weapons. That was more than a violation. That was criminal. The next day, I walked slowly but upright into the city courthouse and filed formal charges: assault, violation of a court order, intentional infliction of emotional distress. I named the HOA cop. I named Karen. I named the Meadow Hills HOA board. By the time I walked out, my hands ached from signing papers, but my spine was straighter than it had been in weeks. Outside the courthouse, my phone buzzed. A neighbor had sent me a link. It was the video, already going viral on a local Meadow Hills community Facebook group. Homeowner tased by Meadow Hills HOA cop while trimming bushes. I clicked play, and there I was crumpling to the ground, my son crying, the cops standing over me. The video ended with Danielle screaming, "Call the real police." The top comment: "These Meadow Hills HOA people think they're above the law. I hope he sues the hell out of them." So did I, and I was just getting started. By Tuesday morning, the video had spread far beyond our Meadow Hills community Facebook group. It was reposted on Reddit's r/s public freakout, picked up by a local news station, and even showed up on my brother-in-law's Twitter feed with the caption, "This is why I moved out of an HOA. Watch this insanity." I didn't care much for internet virality, but in this case, I needed it. Visibility was leverage, and leverage was something I'd lacked for too long. Still, no amount of online sympathy could erase what it felt like when I walked out my front door for the first time since the incident. I'd changed into jeans and a plain t-shirt, the kind of outfit that says, "I just want to be left alone." But even so, as I stepped onto the driveway, I could feel it eyes. Curtains shifting, lawnmowers going quiet, people watching. A jogger passed by and gave me a respectful nod. Another neighbor across the street raised a hand halfway, then dropped it. No one said anything. And that silence, it was louder than any gossip could have been. I bent down to pick up a few tools I'd left out that Sunday morning just before it all happened. A pair of garden shears, a half-used roll of twine, the plastic lemonade cup Danielle had dropped when I hit the ground. I held it in my hand for a moment, then threw it into the trash bin. It felt heavier than it should have. Behind me, the screen door creaked open. "You okay?" Danielle asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. Later that day, the kids came home from school quieter than usual. Marcus didn't barrel into the house like he normally did. Lily kept her headphones in. Danielle tried to act normal, asking about homework, snacks, chores, but the rhythm was off. The air had changed. We were all waiting for the next shoe to drop. It came in the form of a thick envelope slid under our door that evening. Meadow Hills HOA letterhead. Certified mail. No return address, classic intimidation tactic. Inside was a formal notice: temporary suspension of resident privileges due to safety violation. I read it aloud to Danielle. Access to Meadow Hills community amenities, including the pool clubhouse and HOA-sponsored events, is hereby revoked pending the outcome of an internal HOA disciplinary review panel. I laughed. It wasn't funny, but I laughed anyway. A hard, bitter sound. They tased me, and I'm the one who loses privileges. Danielle didn't laugh. She took the letter and tore it in half. The next morning, our mailbox was taped shut. Literally, duct tape. Red spray paint that said non-compliant across the side. That wasn't just Meadow Hills HOA protocol, it was vandalism. I called the local post office, filed a formal complaint, and had a federal postal inspector come out within 24 hours. He took one look at the box, snapped pictures, and said, "They're playing with fire." I nodded. They've been doing that for a while. By Thursday, we were receiving Meadow Hills HOA notices. Daily, everything from unauthorized lawn furniture to inappropriate window coverings. Danielle's seasonal wreath had suddenly become a violation. Marcus's basketball hoop was non-permanent equipment obstructing community flow. They were trying to wear us down. exhaust us with paperwork and pettiness. But what they didn't understand was I'd been trained for attrition. In the Navy, we used to have a saying, pressure reveals character. And the Meadow Hills, HOA, their character was cracking. That same day, I received a call from Officer Monroe, the same city police officer who had first responded when I was tased. He sounded uneasy. Mr. Dalton, I wanted to inform you that the Meadow Hills HOA officer involved in your incident, Mr. Lewis, has been placed on temporary administrative leave while the investigation is pending. Pending, I asked. You saw the video. I did, Monroe admitted. But since Lewis isn't technically law enforcement, the department doesn't have jurisdiction over his employment. It falls under private security regulation. I exhaled slowly. So he gets to roam free while I have to explain to my son why Dad collapsed on the lawn. I get it, Monroe said, sounding genuinely tired. But your civil suit, that might move faster than any internal review. I thanked him and hung up. That evening, a Meadow Hills community meeting was called at the clubhouse. Officially, it was about restoring community unity after a disruptive incident. Unofficially, it was a chance for the Meadow Hills HOA board to do damage control. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway. Danielle begged me not to. You don't owe them anything, she said. Let the lawsuit speak for itself. But it wasn't about them. It was about the people who lived around me, the ones who saw it happen, the ones who were afraid to say anything, the ones who needed to know they weren't crazy. When I walked in, all conversation stopped. Karen Holt was already at the podium, smiling like she was hosting a charity luncheon. Her blazer was bright pink, her pearls glinting under the overhead lights. We're so happy to see so many of you here tonight, she began. It shows how strong our Meadow Hills community really is. I walked down the center aisle and stood silently in the back. And though recent events have been unfortunate, she continued, carefully avoiding the words taser or assault. We must remember to respect authority and trust the processes in place. I raised my hand. Karen faltered. Yes, Mr. Dalton. I didn't yell, didn't grandstand. I just said, is the Meadow Hills HOA board aware that you violated a standing court order? Gasps rippled across the room. Karen tried to recover. I'm not at liberty to... I have a printed copy with the judge's signature, I interrupted. Served and filed. You were notified. And your officer, your employee, tased me in front of my children anyway. Dead silence. I turned to the room. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to like me. But you should all know this. If they can do it to me, they can do it to you. Karen cleared her throat. Mr. Dalton, this isn't the time. Then, when is the time? I asked. After someone ends up in the hospital again. After someone's child gets hurt. After another mailbox gets vandalized. People started murmuring. Heads nodded. I've filed suit, I said clearly. And if anyone here has had similar experiences, fines, threats, harassment, I'd be happy to include your testimony. I left the meeting before Karen could speak again. Outside, the parking lot was quiet. Then I heard footsteps behind me. It was Mrs. Chang, my neighbor, from 2 doors down. She held a manila folder in her hand. I have photos, she said, of them tearing up your mailbox. And a video of Lewis yelling at a delivery guy last week. I took the folder. Thank you. She nodded, her voice low. It's time someone stood up to them. I looked back at the clubhouse, still lit up like a casino. They picked the wrong guy, I whispered. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became what happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a long and deliberate campaign, one that had started not with violence, but with a smile and a clipboard. The harassment began small, almost laughably petty. A note left on our doorstep about a non-standard flower pot. A $25 fine for leaving our trash bins out 10 minutes past the time limit. A warning that our porch light was too bright. At first, I chalked it up to overzealous enforcement, a bored Meadow Hills HOA trying to justify its existence. But then the tone changed. 3 months before the tasing, we received a letter stating that we had failed to submit an architectural change request for repainting our fence. The paint color identical to what had been there before. I called the Meadow Hills HOA office and asked to speak with someone. No one answered. I left messages. No one called back. Then a few days later, we were fined $150. I appealed the fine and attended the monthly Meadow Hills HOA meeting to plead my case. That was the first time I encountered Karen Holt in person. She smiled that politician's smile and welcomed me to the meeting, but as soon as I brought up the fence, her expression turned to stone. She said, the color, though similar, is not on the approved palette. The board's decision is final. I remember standing in that room feeling small under fluorescent lights, while the rest of the board nodded silently behind her. I was outnumbered, outvoted, and outmaneuvered over a fence. Danielle was the one who first said it out loud weeks later. "They're targeting us." She wasn't wrong. After that meeting, our mailbox was struck by a vehicle twice in 2 weeks. No notes were left. The Meadow Hills HOA claimed it was probably the garbage truck, but the driver said he hadn't even come down our street those days. Then came the anonymous complaints, noise violations when our kids laughed too loudly on the trampoline, citations for unapproved toys left in the front yard, a warning for holiday decorations displayed beyond the acceptable time frame when we left our Thanksgiving wreath up until December 2nd. And yet, every time I tried to speak up, I was met with more walls. Emails went unanswered. Certified mail was returned. At one point, I drove to the Meadow Hills HOA office, only to find the door locked during business hours, lights off, blinds drawn. It was like trying to talk to a ghost. But I wasn't the only one. After the Meadow Hills community meeting where I called out Karen in front of the neighborhood, neighbors started trickling in with their own stories. Mrs. Chang told me they'd threatened to sue her for installing a solar panel without board approval, even though she had state permits. A veteran 3 doors down, Mr. Carver, had received a cease and desist for flying a flag on his porch, an American flag. The Meadow Hills HOA claimed it was too large and a visual disruption. "I took it down," he told me quietly, but I never stopped being angry about it. Within a week, my dining room had turned into a war room. Stacks of documentation, printed emails, scanned photos, and handwritten letters from residents who had been fined, intimidated, or publicly shamed. Danielle created a spreadsheet tracking patterns in citations by household, revealing that nearly 80% of the violations over the past 2 years had been issued to the same 5 homes, ours among them. It wasn't enforcement, it was targeting. And now we had proof. But even as we gathered allies, the Meadow Hills HOA doubled down. A letter arrived claiming that our lawn was non-conforming because it had too much clover, a wild species not permitted under community regulation. They gave us 7 days to remove it, or face a $300 fine. I almost laughed. Clover. That was their next play. Then a notice that our car, a perfectly ordinary gray SUV, had been parked in a manner that visually obstructs neighboring driveways. It was parked in our own driveway. When I called the Meadow Hills HOA hotline, it rang once and went to voicemail again. It didn't matter. I was done playing their game. I had another game in mind, one they didn't know I knew how to play. That weekend, I drove 2 hours to the state capitol and visited the Office of Consumer Affairs. With me, I brought a thick binder of documentation. I explained the pattern, the abuse, the selective enforcement, the use of a weapon by a private security officer, and most importantly, the violation of a standing court order. The attorney on duty raised an eyebrow as I laid out the paperwork. "This isn't just a civil complaint," she said. "This could be criminal." "I thought so," I replied. She promised an investigation and said she'd expedite the matter to the Attorney General's office. I thanked her and left heart pounding, not from nerves, but from clarity. We weren't powerless anymore. When I returned home, I found Lily sitting on the porch steps, her sketch pad in her lap. She looked up and smiled gently. "You were gone a long time." "I had to talk to someone important," I said. She tilted her head. "Like a lawyer." "Even bigger," I smiled. "Someone who makes the rules." She handed me her sketch pad. On it was a drawing of our house, scribbled in crayon. On the roof, she'd written in block letters, "Safe." I swallowed hard. "That's a really good drawing." She nodded. "I just wanted to make sure everyone knows it's our home." I bent down and kissed the top of her head. "It is. And no one's going to take that from us." That night, Danielle and I stayed up late, strategizing. "I want to go public," I said. "Beyond Facebook. A full media piece." She hesitated. "Won't that make us a bigger target?" "We're already a target," I said. "But now we have a story, and people need to hear it." She nodded slowly. "Then let's do it." The next morning, I contacted a local investigative journalist I'd met years ago at a veterans advocacy event. I sent her everything: documents, photos, videos, witness statements. Within 48 hours, she called me. "James, I don't usually say this up front," she began, "but this story is going to explode." "Good," I said, "because I want the world to see what happens when you give unchecked power to the wrong people." And we weren't done yet. While the Meadow Hills HOA tried to hide behind vague policies and cowardly citations, We were mobilizing neighbors, building a coalition, and preparing for a town hall. Karen didn't know it yet, but the homeowners were coming for the board. And we were bringing receipts. I was always taught that if someone picks a fight with you, don't just fight back. Fight smart. Outmaneuver them. And in this case, that meant turning pain into paper, because paper wins battles in courtrooms and city halls. The first step was organization. I turned our guest room into a tactical operations center. Notebooks, whiteboards, storage bins, and digital files, everything neatly cataloged, backed up in the cloud, and copied to 2 external drives. Danielle laughed nervously when she saw the setup. "You going full CIA on the Meadow Hills HOA?" "Just covering my bases," I said, sliding a binder into a shelf labeled Harassment Incidents Phase 1. They've underestimated me long enough. Every fine, every notice, every interaction I'd had with the Meadow Hills HOA over the last year, it all went on the board. I had printouts of their own bylaws, comparison photos from other homes in the neighborhood that weren't cited for the same supposed violations, and sworn statements from neighbors. I even created a timeline leading up to the Taser incident. Red markers for aggression, yellow for harassment, green for retaliation after I pushed back, and a bold black line for the day I was assaulted on my lawn. Danielle helped me color code it. I tracked down the original approval for our fence painting, which had been buried in a scanned PDF, attached to a Meadow Hills HOA newsletter from 2 years ago, a subtle acknowledgement that our paint color had been approved before they retroactively labeled it non-compliant. I dug through our mortgage documents and found a little clause in the Meadow Hills HOA covenant that required a 30-day warning before enforcement actions. They never honored it. But that wasn't all. I started interviewing others in the neighborhood. Quietly, over coffee, on morning walks, at school pickup lines, and the stories flowed like water from a cracked dam. Mrs. Chang, already my ally, had photos of Lewis, the so-called HOA cop, illegally entering her backyard and taking pictures without notice. Mr. Carver, the veteran neighbor who'd been told to remove his flag, handed me his correspondence. The Meadow Hills HOA had cited him with unauthorized display of political messaging. That wasn't just disrespectful. That was unlawful. I was already drafting a letter to the American Legion on his behalf. Then there was Ms. Lopez, a young mother who had stopped me as I was jogging early one morning. She'd been fined for her toddler's tricycle being visible from the street. Her appeal letter was met with a response that included thinly veiled language about the standards expected from renters, even though she owned her home. "They're trying to push out anyone who doesn't fit their mold," she whispered. "Anyone who's not white, wealthy, or silent." And suddenly I saw it clearly. This wasn't just about me, or my yard, or even the taser. It was a culture of intimidation, a pattern, a system built on fear, silence, and fake authority. And Lewis, he was just their blunt instrument. The more I uncovered, the more energized I felt. Physically, I was still recovering. The muscle spasms were down to once or twice a day. I could walk without trembling now. The doctor said there might be lingering nerve sensitivity for a while, but nothing permanent. But mentally, I felt sharper than I had in years, focused, purpose-driven. The anger hadn't gone away, it had just evolved. Then one afternoon, something unexpected arrived in the mail. It was a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a small stack of documents, Lewis's employment contract, a signed waiver from the Meadow Hills HOA board, giving him escalated enforcement discretion, and most interesting of all, a disciplinary report from the private security firm that had trained him. The report detailed an earlier incident at another neighborhood where Lewis had forcibly entered a homeowner's garage over a noise complaint. No criminal charges were filed, but the firm noted aggressive tendencies and questionable judgment under pressure. I stared at the report, realizing someone inside their circle had sent it to me. Someone was defecting. The timing couldn't have been better. That evening, I had a Zoom call with Maria Jennings, a civil rights attorney referred by the investigative journalist covering our story. Maria was sharp, direct, and deeply familiar with HOA abuse cases. "I've read everything you sent," she said. "And let me be clear, this is beyond just civil litigation. The Meadow Hills HOA is looking at multiple liabilities here. Use of excessive force by a non-sworn officer, disregard for court orders, potential discriminatory enforcement. You have a solid case." I nodded. What's the next step? We file a formal complaint in civil court, not just for you, but as a class action, if we can get enough neighbors on board. Meanwhile, I'll forward this to the district attorney's office for criminal review. And that court order they violated, that's contempt. Good, I said. I want this to go beyond headlines. It will, she assured me. But James, are you ready for the blowback? I didn't even blink. I've been tased in front of my kids. There's not much left they can do to scare me. She smiled. That's what I needed to hear. The next morning, I printed out a copy of the original court order I'd filed months ago, the one barring the Meadow Hills HOA from taking any enforcement action against me, and walked it over to the HOA office myself. The office, as always, looked like a bank lobby designed by someone who thought beige was a personality. Lewis was there seated at the front desk, looking bored and flipping through a magazine. When he looked up and saw me, his expression changed instantly, from apathy to tight-jawed defensiveness. I handed him the court order. Read it, I said. He glanced at it, then back at me. What is this? Page 2, I said evenly. You might want to start there. He turned the page and read. I watched his face morph confusion, then realization, then fear. His lips moved silently as he read the paragraph confirming that any enforcement action taken against my property or person would be considered a violation of state injunction. You never even looked at it, did you? I asked. He didn't answer. I served it months ago. Registered mail. Return receipt signed by Karen Holt. His eyes dropped to the line with Karen's signature. I leaned in, voice steady but sharp. You assaulted a protected individual. On camera. With a weapon. In violation of a court order. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. You might want to call your lawyer, or better yet, a real cop. And with that, I walked out into the sunlight feeling 10 feet taller. By the time I walked back to my house that morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, clarity. Not just about the case or the law, or the Meadow Hills HOA's vulnerability. No. This clarity ran deeper. It was the certainty of justice coiling beneath the surface, ready to rise. Danielle met me at the door with raised eyebrows. You look smug, she said. I just handed Lewis the court order. Her mouth dropped open, the one they violated when he tased you. I nodded. He read it, froze, didn't say a word. She blinked. He had no idea it existed, did he? Not a clue. Which means Karen probably never told him. Or worse, she knew and ignored it. Danielle exhaled, leaning against the doorframe. God, that's massive. It's criminal, I said. And now we have him in possession of the proof. Can't deny what you've read. She followed me to the kitchen table where my files had taken over every inch of surface space. The journalist Rebecca Mills had already emailed me to confirm she was pitching the story to her editor that afternoon, and if approved, it would air by the end of the week. Meanwhile, Maria, the civil rights attorney, had begun drafting the initial complaint. I forwarded her a summary of the incident with Lewis and the Meadow Hills HOA's failure to acknowledge the court order. That afternoon, Maria called. James, she said, I spoke with a contact inside the county court system. Turns out your injunction is one of only a dozen issued against HOAs statewide in the past 5 years. That makes this a landmark case. Landmark, I repeated. Yeah, they didn't just ignore civil regulation. They ignored a judge's signature. We're going to file for contempt of court, and once we have confirmation of who received and signed that injunction, we can pin criminal negligence on them too. I opened my laptop and pulled up the certified mail record. There it was, scanned receipt, time-stamped and signed. Signed by Karen Holt. Maria whistled. Send that to me now. She paused, then added, this could unravel their entire board. I didn't say it, but I already knew. That night, Danielle and I sat outside under the stars. The air had turned cool and quiet, and for once, it didn't feel oppressive. We were quiet for a long time, sipping tea, listening to the rhythmic chorus of distant frogs. I've been thinking, she said softly. This isn't just about us anymore, is it? No, I admitted. It's not. You're not just fighting for our house. I'm fighting for what happens when people get told they don't matter. When someone abuses power and expects you to stay quiet. I want our kids to see what it looks like when you don't. She reached across the armrest and squeezed my hand. Then, whatever you need, I'm with you. The next morning, we printed 25 copies of the court order and walked the Meadow Hills neighborhood house to house. Some neighbors we knew well. Some we barely knew at all. But every single one of them had seen the video. Some had watched in horror. Others had watched in silence. Now they watched as I handed them copies of the court order, signed dated violated, and said, this is what they ignored. I didn't ask them for anything. I didn't need to. One by one, they spoke up. Mrs. Chang posted in the Meadow Hills community group, if they can taser James for trimming bushes, what stops them from doing worse to the rest of us? I stand with the Daltons. Mr. Carver took down his porch sign that read, Meadow Hills HOA required notice board, and replaced it with an American flag full size and a handwritten sign that said, this flag doesn't violate anything but tyranny. Ms. Lopez hosted a community discussion night in her backyard. Over 20 families showed up. I was asked to speak. I didn't prepare anything, just told the truth. And people listened. They nodded. They asked questions. They shared their own stories, some far worse than mine. Stories of elderly residents being fined into fear of families forced to sell their homes under the weight of constant fees. Stories of silence. That silence was ending. And then 2 days later it happened. The news aired. Rebecca Mills's segment opened with a freeze frame of the moment Lewis tased me. My body falling. Marcus's face contorted in fear. Danielle's scream just out of frame. Then came the narration. A local homeowner, James Dalton, was tased in front of his children by a Meadow Hills HOA security officer, despite a court injunction barring the HOA from enforcing any actions against him. Tonight we investigate how one suburban association took power too far. It was brutal and brilliant. By the next morning, I had 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. One was a representative from the State Housing Authority. Another was a county supervisor's office. The third was from the local district attorney. They all wanted the same thing: documentation. I sent it. All of it. That afternoon, Karen Holt showed up on my doorstep. She didn't look like herself, no pearls, no perfect blazer. She looked smaller, shaken. Mr. Dalton, she began, voice brittle. May I speak with you? Danielle stood beside me on the porch. I didn't move. About what? About everything, Karen said. The board is under enormous pressure. I just want to find a resolution. I waited. I think, she continued, it would be best for all parties if we reached a private agreement. I'm authorized to offer a settlement. I almost laughed. You think this is about money? Her eyes flicked away. I pulled a copy of the court order from my pocket and held it up. You signed this. You authorized Lewis to ignore it. You let him hurt me in front of my kids. I didn't know he would. Stop, Danielle said. You knew exactly what would happen when you handed a man like that a weapon and told him he had power. Karen's voice dropped to a whisper. You're going to destroy everything. No, I said. I'm going to rebuild something better. And I closed the door. Behind it, Marcus stood watching. He didn't say a word, just walked over and handed me something. It was the sketch Lily had made. The one with safe written on our roof. I pinned it to the wall in the dining room right above the court documents. And I promised myself no matter what happened next, that word would be true. For my house. For my family. For every home in our Meadow Hills neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had printed dozens of warning letters over the years. Passive-aggressive notes about Christmas lights, sidewalk chalk, and patio furniture. But not one of them carried the weight, the finality, of the single piece of paper I now held in my hands. The court order. 1 page. 2 paragraphs. Signed, sealed, time-stamped. And yet it had more power than their entire handbook of manufactured rules. Still, I hadn't seen Lewis since the day I dropped it on his desk and watched his face lose all color. But I wanted something more. Accountability wasn't just paperwork, it was confrontation. So when the Meadow Hills HOA posted a notice for a surprise security training demonstration in the community park featuring none other than Officer Lewis himself, I knew I had to go. Danielle was hesitant. What are you hoping to get out of this? Recognition, I said. In front of everyone. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Be careful. It was a warm Saturday morning. The kind where families usually gathered for pancake fundraisers or gardening clubs. But this wasn't one of those Saturdays. The park was unusually crowded, not with families, but with watchers. Meadow Hills neighbors, residents, people carrying lawn chairs not for comfort, but for positioning. Everyone had heard about the tasing. Everyone had seen the video. And now everyone wanted to see what Meadow Hills HOA Officer Lewis would say for himself. He arrived flanked by 2 board members in a full faux police uniform. Badges, gleaming belt overloaded with tools and sunglasses, far too reflective for a cloudy day. The man looked like he was auditioning for a role he'd already lost. He began with a microphone standing on a portable riser. "Thank you, residents, for attending this demonstration," he said. "My role as Meadow Hills HOA security liaison is to ensure safety, order, and compliance." The crowd was dead silent. He continued reading from a script. "Occasionally, enforcement requires a firm hand. In those moments, we rely on training authority and protocol." I raised my hand. The murmur began instantly. Lewis stiffened. The board members beside him whispered nervously. He tried to move on, but someone else called out, "Let him speak." Then another. "That's the guy who got tased." And just like that, the mic was handed over. I stepped onto the riser beside him, calm, measured. "Officer Lewis," I said, "do you recognize this document?" I held up the court order. He didn't answer. "Do you recognize your own signature on the incident report dated 3 days after the attack?" I asked, pulling another sheet from my folder. He glanced at it, jaw tight. "This court order," I continued, raising it higher, "was delivered to the Meadow Hills HOA and signed for by President Holt. It prohibits any HOA representative, employee, or affiliate from enforcing penalties or taking physical action against me or my property." More murmurs. "Despite this," I added, "you used a taser on me while I was unarmed on my own lawn in front of my wife and children. Do you deny this?" He didn't answer. "Then I'd like you," I said, turning slightly toward the crowd to read the order aloud, "so everyone here can hear what you were supposed to follow." He froze. I handed him the paper. He looked down at it, face paling. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "Read it," I said again, quieter now. "You owe them that much." Finally, in a halting voice, he began. "By order of the County Superior Court, the Meadow Hills Homeowners Association and any representatives thereof are hereby restrained from enforcing punitive or physical actions against James Dalton or his property." His voice faltered. Eyes jumped to the last line. "Violation of this order will be considered contempt of court and subject to criminal and civil penalties." The silence was crushing. No applause, no shouting. Just the weight of consequence settling over every person in the park. He handed the paper back, his hand shaking. I turned to the crowd. "I didn't come here for revenge. I came here for truth. For months, I was painted as the problem, the loud one, the difficult one. But the truth is, I followed the law. I respected the rules until those in power decided the rules didn't apply to them." I looked directly at Karen Holt, standing near the snack table, pale and visibly trembling. They were wrong. After that, I stepped down. There were no cheers, no chants. But people stood. They stood with me quietly and turned away from the platform where Lewis remained frozen. And one by one, they walked past him, not with fear, but with something far worse. Disappointment. Later that day, my inbox filled with messages from Meadow Hills residents who had never spoken to me before. "Thank you for standing up for us. They've bullied us for too long. My dad cried when he watched you speak. He said he'd never seen someone hold power accountable like that." The tide had turned, but it didn't stop there. The very next morning, Lewis resigned. He left a letter taped to the Meadow Hills HOA office door. The same door I'd once stood outside, locked out, dismissed. In it, he cited stress, lack of support, and public pressure as his reasons. He never apologized. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was the closest thing to justice I could have asked for from him. But my fight wasn't over. I met with Maria at her office later that week. She had filed the complaint, and we had been assigned a court date. "We're moving forward," she said, "and we're naming the entire board as co-defendants." "Good," I replied, "because I want them to feel what they made us feel, powerless, afraid, and alone." She nodded. "But they won't be alone. They'll be together on that witness stand explaining to a judge why they thought community codes were stronger than the Constitution." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and nerves. Its walls, sterile and pale, had probably witnessed more compromise than justice. But I was determined to change that, at least for one day. Danielle sat beside me in the reception area, holding a manila folder full of originals. Maria Jennings, our attorney, stood across the room in a quiet but heated phone conversation with a clerk from the district attorney's office. Her brow was furrowed, but not in frustration and calculation. The way someone furrows their brow before they take a winning shot. "Okay," she finally said, hanging up and striding toward us. "We're on the docket for both civil and preliminary criminal review. I've filed the complaint. The charges we're pursuing are official misconduct, criminal negligence, assault, and contempt of court." Danielle let out a slow breath. I just nodded. I'd spent so long preparing for this moment that it felt almost calm. "Will they be served today?" I asked. Maria smiled. "They'll be served by the end of the week. but you might get a show before then. My guess, they'll try to get ahead of the media storm. And sure enough, they did. 2 days later, a message was sent out from the Meadow Hills HOA board to all homeowners in the community. We regret to inform residents that Meadow Hills HOA Officer Lewis has voluntarily resigned from his position. We understand that recent events have caused distress and division, and we are working to rebuild trust. The board is reviewing internal procedures and will be offering a listening session this Thursday. A listening session. After everything they had done now, they wanted to listen. That same morning, Maria received a letter from the Meadow Hills HOA's legal counsel. It offered what they probably thought was generous a settlement of $40,000 in exchange for withdrawing the lawsuit and signing a non-disclosure agreement. Maria emailed it to me with the subject line, "You'll enjoy this." I read it and laughed. Not because of the number, though it was insulting, but because they really believed this could be silenced. I called Maria immediately. "Tell them no. No NDA, no silence." "Done," she said. "I'll draft a formal response. Do you want me to include a counteroffer?" "Yes," I said, "but not for money." There was a pause. "Go on." "I want a public admission. I want the board to acknowledge the violation of the court order, the assault, and the retaliation. I want a signed statement delivered to every resident in the Meadow Hills neighborhood, and I want them to commit to a full re-election of the board within 30 days. Maria chuckled. "That's ambitious." "It's justice. Then let's aim for it." The days that followed were quiet in the way a forest is quiet before a storm. We watched from our porch as board members stopped showing up to community events. Karen's car disappeared from her driveway for a full week. Rumors spread like wildfire about resignations, about lawsuits, about what really happened that day on my lawn. More neighbors came forward. I got a call from Mr. Thorne, a quiet man at the end of the cul-de-sac, who I'd spoken to maybe twice in 3 years. He was shaking on the phone. "They fined me $5 for planting tomatoes," he said. Said vegetable gardens in front yards were unsightly. But they let Karen keep her ceramic frogs. "Do you have the letters?" I asked. "I kept everything." "Then we'd be honored to have your testimony." We compiled it all. Maria submitted an amended filing, now a class action suit, on behalf of 11 homeowners. Each of them had a story of disproportionate enforcement, harassment, or in one case, forced foreclosure. The narrative was no longer just about a taser. It was about a power structure built on exclusion, intimidation, and unchecked authority. The media picked it up again. This time, the story ran statewide. Meadow Hills HOA abuse under fire, residents, file class, action suit against HOA board, after assault, harassment, and retaliation. A follow-up article included excerpts from the court order, a timeline of violations, and interviews with Mrs. Chang and Mr. Carver. Ms. Lopez was quoted directly, "We just want to live in peace. These people treated our homes like they were their kingdom. But this isn't a kingdom. This is a neighborhood." And that's when things really began to shift. One morning, I received a knock on the door. It was Rebecca Mills, the reporter who'd first broken the story. "I'm working on a follow-up feature," she said, more in depth. "I want to walk your property with you. Show what was happening that day." We walked the lawn together. I pointed to the hedges I'd been trimming, the spot where I collapsed, the corner where Marcus had stood screaming. She took notes silently, occasionally glancing at me with a look I couldn't quite place. "What's it like?" she asked quietly, "knowing that video of your worst moment is what helped start all this change." I thought for a long moment. "It's strange," I said, "because when I watch it, I don't see me. I see Marcus. I see Lily. I see my wife screaming. And I remember the sound more than the pain. But what hurts most isn't the shock. It's the silence that came after. The way they tried to pretend it didn't matter." She nodded slowly. "And now I said they know it mattered. They all know." A week later, the Meadow Hills HOA board met in a closed emergency session. Maria received a call the next day. "They're dissolving the enforcement division," she said, and Karen Holt just submitted her resignation. I sat down at the kitchen table, stunned. Danielle stood beside me, hand on my shoulder. "It's really happening," she said. And it was. We weren't just winning a case. We were reclaiming a community. One by one, neighbors began reaching out, not just to testify, but to organize, to rebuild. A group formed to draft a new set of Meadow Hills HOA bylaws. Another to run for the upcoming emergency election. I was asked if I'd consider serving on the board. I politely declined. I've had enough power for a while, I joked. I just want to mow my lawn in peace. But I agreed to help write the new code of conduct. And on a sunny Sunday afternoon, nearly 2 months after the incident, we held a Meadow Hills neighborhood gathering in the park. No officers, no board members, just families. Marcus played catch with Lily. Danielle handed out lemonade. And I stood beside the very spot where I'd once watched a man draw a taser on me like I was a threat. Now I stood as a neighbor, a father, a man who refused to be silenced. It happened faster than anyone expected. The same Meadow Hills HOA board that had once ruled the neighborhood with a smug smile and a heavy hand began to unravel, not behind closed doors, but in full daylight under the collective gaze of a community no longer afraid. It started with a leaked email. A neighbor forwarded it to me late one evening, an internal message from Karen Holt to the rest of the board. In it, she admitted that the court order had been overlooked, and more damningly, that allowing James Dalton to become a martyr is a threat to our credibility and control. I read it 3 times before I handed it to Danielle. This is it, I said. This is the crack in the wall. She took a slow breath, reading it silently. Do we release it? We don't have to, I replied. It's already out. By the following morning, screenshots of the email had gone viral within the Meadow Hills community Facebook group. Residents who had once stayed silent were now writing paragraphs. I defended this board. I was wrong. They ignored a court order and used force on a father in front of his kids. What more proof do we need? This is bigger than lawn violations. This is abuse of power. By noon, 3 board members had submitted their resignations via an open letter. They didn't try to explain themselves, they just folded. And the Meadow Hills community was done being polite. That Thursday, the Meadow Hills HOA clubhouse, once their fortress, was packed to capacity. Folding chairs spilled out into the hallway. Cameras from local news stations lined the back wall. For the first time, the meeting wasn't led by Karen. She hadn't shown up. No surprise. Instead, the remaining board vice president, a man named Richard Sloan, stood at the podium visibly sweating. I know many of you are angry, he began, and rightfully so. Mistakes were made. Not mistakes, someone shouted. Assault. Criminal negligence, yelled another. Sloan raised his hands. Please, let me speak. But the room had turned. Mr. Carver, the veteran neighbor, stood from his seat in the 3rd row. He wore a simple navy blue jacket and held a stack of papers in his hand. My name is Alan Carver, he said, voice strong and clear. For years I've flown a flag on my porch. I served in the military so I could. This Meadow Hills HOA fined me, threatened legal action, and humiliated me for it. But I never spoke up until James Dalton showed me it was possible. A round of applause broke out. Sloan tried to interrupt, but the room no longer belonged to him. Mrs. Chang spoke next, holding up a binder filled with color-coded tabs. This contains every violation I received in the last 12 months. 21 fines. Not one justified. Not one ever explained. This is not a community. This has been a regime. Even Ms. Lopez stepped forward, baby on her hip. I was told my child's toys were a visual nuisance. Do you know what that did to me? I felt ashamed for having a life. One after another they stood. Ordinary people, no longer voiceless. And then slowly others followed, residents who had once stayed quiet out of fear, now rising with clarity and strength. When someone called my name, I didn't want to go up. I had already said so much. I wanted this moment to be about them. But Danielle leaned over and whispered, You started this. End it the right way. So I stood and walked to the front. The room went still. I didn't ask for any of this. I began. When I moved here, I just wanted to be left alone. To raise my kids, to trim my hedges, to have lemonade on Sundays. There was a soft chuckle, but they made me a symbol. Not because I wanted to be, but because they underestimated how far a man would go to protect his family's dignity. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of people who had once been strangers and now stood beside me like comrades. This isn't about one man being tased. It's about the fact that it ever got that far. That power left unchecked will always seek control. And the only thing that stops it is us. I stepped away from the podium. A standing ovation followed, not for me, but for us. The next day, the entire Meadow Hills HOA board resigned. Every single member. They issued a final statement. It has become clear that our leadership no longer represents the values or will of the Meadow Hills community. We are stepping down effective immediately to allow for a democratic and transparent election of new board members. It was over, but the work had only just begun. That weekend, I was invited to help moderate the formation of a temporary transition committee. It was surreal sitting in the very clubhouse where they once called me a threat, now discussing healing, rebuilding, and representation. I declined to run for the new board again. But I did offer one thing: to host a community roundtable on legal rights, HOA boundaries, and how to challenge abuse. Maria helped me assemble resource guides. Rebecca, the journalist, offered to attend and document the process. Even the city council sent a representative. Word spread. People from neighboring communities asked if they could attend. They had seen the story. They had experienced similar abuses. What started as one man standing on his lawn turned into something far greater. And for the first time in years, I slept soundly. Not because the fight was over, but because we had finally taken it into our own hands. That Sunday, I walked my son and daughter down to the Meadow Hills Community Park. No guards, no clipboards, no tension in the air. Just sunlight, laughter, and peace. As we passed the community sign at the entrance, Marcus paused and pointed. Someone had added a hand-painted wooden plaque beneath the original Meadow Hills HOA lettering. It read, "Neighbors, not enforcers." I smiled. That would do. Fall arrived slowly that year, painting the trees in burnt gold and deep crimson, as if nature herself was exhaling after months of tension. The air was cooler now, the Meadow Hills neighborhood quieter, but not with fear, with peace. The kind that settles in after a long, hard storm has passed. I woke early one morning to find Marcus already dressed, tying his sneakers with quiet precision. "You running with me today?" I asked, grabbing my sweatshirt. He nodded, eyes serious. "Yeah, thought it was time." We didn't speak much on the trail behind the Meadow Hills neighborhood. Just the sound of our feet on gravel and the occasional breath between steps. But as we neared the old clubhouse, now shuttered and awaiting community redesign, he slowed. "This where it happened?" he asked. I didn't lie. "Yeah." He looked at it for a moment, then turned to me. "I had dreams about it for a while." "You falling?" The taser sound. My heart tightened. "I'm sorry you saw that." "I'm not," he said. "I saw you stand up." I stopped walking. He kept going, then turned back, flashing the grin I hadn't seen in months. "Come on, old man. I'm not carrying you if you cramp up." When we got home, Danielle was setting out breakfast. Nothing fancy. Just toast, scrambled eggs, and coffee. That tasted like resolve. She kissed me on the cheek. "I heard the Meadow Hills HOA wants to use your incident as a training case for the new board." I raised an eyebrow. As in, don't do this. "Exactly." I shook my head, amused. Well, at least I'm finally useful. She sat beside me, resting a hand on mine. "You didn't just change things here, James. You gave people permission to speak, to protect themselves, to say no." She wasn't wrong. Emails had poured in from around the state, homeowners from other HOA-run neighborhoods asking how to file injunctions, how to document abuse, how to reclaim power from the faceless systems that had taken over their lives. Maria and I began working with a housing justice nonprofit to create a resource hub. Rebecca's follow-up piece aired on a national news segment. She ended it with the words, "The one man got tased, but a neighborhood stood up." We weren't just a story anymore. We were a movement. Later that month, the Meadow Hills neighborhood held its first fully democratic election for a new HOA board. Real ballots. Real transparency. No last-minute candidates. No secret handoffs. Mrs. Chang was elected president. Mr. Carver took on community outreach. Ms. Lopez led the finance committee. As for me, I attended the first board meeting not as a leader but as a neighbor. I sat in the back row and listened as they proposed changes to the bylaws, discussed mental health support for residents, and even suggested turning the old clubhouse into a multi-purpose center with a library, a tool-sharing station, and a small memorial garden for those who had lost loved ones during the pandemic. The last item on the agenda, a resolution to ban private security personnel with enforcement powers from ever operating within the Meadow Hills neighborhood again. It passed unanimously. When the meeting ended, people lingered. They shook hands. They shared stories. Kids ran in and out between chairs without being told to quiet down. It didn't feel like an HOA meeting. It felt like home. One evening, a few weeks later, I was walking with Lily down the sidewalk, her small hand swinging in mine. She pointed at a house a few doors down one, with a bright new flag, a flourishing garden, and a porch swing someone had finally reinstalled after being told it was structurally non-conforming. "Is that where the nice lady lives?" she asked. "Mrs. Lopez." She nodded. She gave me hot chocolate at the park. Yep, that's her. She looked up at me. Are things good now? I thought about that for a long second. They're better, I said. And better is where good begins. She smiled. Okay. A breeze lifted the edge of her coat, and she clung a little closer. We reached the corner and turned back toward home. Our home. Still ours. Still standing. Later that night, I sat at my desk staring at a blank Word document titled simply, "What happened in my Meadow Hills neighborhood?" It was time to write it all down. Not for court, not for lawyers, not even for journalists, but for the future. For my kids. For anyone who ever gets told they don't have a voice, that rules are more important than people, that silence is safer than resistance. I began typing. They said I was difficult, that I asked too many questions, that